The grand negotiation chamber of the Galactic Council's Unity Station was a masterpiece of xeno-architecture. Designed to accommodate over 300 sapient species, it balanced functionality with symbolic meaning. Concentric rings of delegation booths faced the central speaking platform, their heights carefully calibrated to place eye stalks, sensory clusters, and other perceptual organs at optimal heights. The chamber's acoustics accommodated everything from subsonic rumbles to ultrasonic chirps. Environmental fields maintained dozens of different atmospheric bubbles simultaneously. None of this magnificence seemed to impress the human delegation. Ambassador Zara Blackwood stood at the exit archway, shoulders slumped in unmistakable disappointment, as various councillors congratulated her on the remarkable achievement in interspecies cooperation and historic peace accord just ratified between Earth and the Vrexian Ascendancy. "Yes, thank you," she replied to the 15th such compliment, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. A historic day for all parties involved. Behind her, the rest of the human delegation displayed similar signs of deflation. Colonel Javier Reyes was checking his datapad with a frown. Dr. Vivian Chen was massaging her temples. Even junior diplomat Talib Okafor, usually ebullient, was staring into space with a vacant expression. Xrl'tk, diplomatic observer from the ancient ZK-TAN consensus, hovered nearby on gravitic suspensors, all 12 optical clusters focused on the humans. In 6 centuries of diplomatic observation, Xrl'tk had documented the behaviors of 347 species during major negotiations. The humans' response pattern was anomalous. Most species displayed relief after avoiding armed conflict. Some showed triumph, others showed submission. The full emotional spectrum was well catalogued in Xrl'tk's extensive taxonomic database of diplomatic behaviors. Disappointment, however, was unprecedented. Ambassador Blackwood, Xrl'tk ventriloquized through its translation module, propelling itself forward on a cushion of manipulated gravity. "The ZK-TAN consensus extends felicitations on your successful peace negotiation." "Thank you, Observer Xrl'tk," Blackwood replied with practiced politeness. "The human delegation appreciates the consensus's support throughout the process. If permissible, this observer would inquire about your emotional state," Xrl'tk continued, its primary sensory cluster pulsing with the bioluminescent equivalent of raised eyebrows. "Your physiological indicators suggest disappointment. Has the treaty terms proven unsatisfactory?" A flash of genuine emotion, surprise, perhaps alarm, crossed Blackwood's face before her diplomatic mask reasserted itself. "Not at all," she replied smoothly. "The terms are excellent, better than we expected, actually." "Then this observer is confused by your display of disappointment behavioral markers." Colonel Reyes snorted, a sound Xrl'tk's database flagged as indicating derision or amusement. Blackwood shot him a warning glance. "Just tired, Observer Xrl'tk," she said. "Human negotiations can be emotionally draining." "Indeed." Xrl'tk gravitic field pulsed skeptically. "This observer has noted similar response patterns in 17 previous human peace negotiations. The statistical improbability of coincidental emotional exhaustion suggests alternative explanations." Blackwood's diplomatic smile tightened imperceptibly. "We're simply adjusting expectations. If you'll excuse us, the delegation has post-negotiation reports to file with Earth Central." As the humans departed, Xrl'tk's secondary analysis cluster processed the encounter. Something about humanity's approach to peace negotiations warranted further investigation. The statistical anomalies were too significant to ignore. After 12 centuries of diplomatic observation, the ZK-TAN consensus had learned one universal truth. When a species behaves irrationally, the most interesting explanations usually lie beneath. Humanity's entry into the galactic community hadn't exactly followed the standard first contact protocols. Most species were discovered by survey vessels or detected via their early superluminal communications experiments. First contact specialists would then initiate careful cultural exchange programs, gradually introducing the species to the wider galactic civilization over decades or centuries. Humans, characteristically, had skipped several steps in this process when they reverse-engineered a crashed scout ship and built their own crude FTL vessel before anyone realized they should be monitored. Their unannounced arrival at Proxima Station had triggered 3 separate security protocols and nearly caused an incident with the notoriously jumpy Flaxian defense fleet. "We come in peace," the human captain had transmitted, "but we're not opposed to other options if necessary." That peculiar duality, the simultaneous offering of friendship and threat, became humanity's diplomatic signature in subsequent decades. They joined councils and confederations with enthusiastic cooperation while simultaneously building military installations throughout their territory. They participated in cultural exchange programs while developing weapons that leveraged their new xenotechnological knowledge. Xenosociologists eventually categorized Earth as a paradox world, one of the rare planets where evolutionary pressures produced seemingly contradictory traits in its dominant species. Humans had evolved as both pack-bonding social cooperators and ruthless territorial competitors. They could form deep attachments to complete strangers, even aliens whose biochemistry shared nothing with their own, while maintaining the capacity for calculated violence that shocked even the predatory species of the Council. Most significantly for diplomatic relations, humans were one of the few known species that had evolved practicing both war and peace as deliberate, formalized activities. Most sapient species developed one dominant conflict resolution strategy. The hive minds resolved disagreements through internal consensus building. The silicon-based crystalline intelligences used rigid mathematical hierarchies. The gas giant dwelling floaters employed intricate resource-sharing algorithms. Humans used everything from handshakes to thermonuclear exchanges, with countless gradations between. This made them simultaneously the most flexible negotiators in the galaxy and the most unpredictable. Their diplomatic corps was renowned for finding compromise solutions to intractable conflicts, while their military had never lost a direct confrontation. Both facts made many Council species deeply uncomfortable. The Vrexian ascendancy had learned this the hard way. Their territorial expansion had encountered minimal resistance from most border species until they reached human space. After 3 inconclusive skirmishes that demonstrated humanity's surprising military capability, the Vrexians had requested formal negotiation. To everyone's surprise, the humans had been remarkably accommodating at the negotiating table. They conceded several disputed systems, agreed to generous resource-sharing arrangements, and proposed joint development projects along the new border. And then they had walked out looking like someone had cancelled their birthday celebration. It wasn't the first time. The pattern had repeated with the Zorvasian Imperium, the Naxos Collective, and the Krith Dominion. Each time, human diplomats skillfully negotiated peace accords that favored their counterparts almost too generously, then departed with unmistakable disappointment. Xrl'tk was determined to understand why. The negotiation chambers of Unity Station were designed with multiple redundant recording systems, both for historical documentation and to prevent duplicity. However, these official systems recorded only the formal proceedings. The unofficial discussions, where real diplomacy often happened, occurred in the station's numerous social spaces. That evening, Xrl'tk hovered near the ceiling of the Neutral Zone, a popular refreshment facility among diplomats. Its chameleon skin adaptation rendered it nearly invisible against the decorative lighting fixtures. The human delegation occupied a corner booth, their body language notably different from their formal diplomatic postures. Ambassador Blackwood had exchanged her ceremonial attire for what the Observer recognized as casual clothing, and was consuming a beverage that Xrl'tk's chemical sensors identified as ethanol-based. "Another successful failure," Colonel Reyes was saying, his tone matching the human expression of sarcasm. "Earth Central will be thrilled." "They accepted every concession," Dr. Chen replied, gesturing with her drink. "The resource-sharing agreement, the demilitarized zones, even the cultural exchange program. I was sure they'd balk at that last one." "Vrexians love studying other species," junior diplomat Okafor noted. "They're probably already designing experiments to run on our exchange students." Nothing harmful, Blackwood interjected. We were very clear about the protocols. Still, Reyes said, leaning forward, I was certain they'd push back on Section 12. The language practically invited them to reject it. I know, Blackwood's voice carried genuine frustration. We left so many openings. The disputed territory clause was deliberately ambiguous. The timetable for withdrawal was absurdly accelerated. I even included that ridiculous provision about xenotourism rights. And they signed it all, Chen said, shaking her head, without a single substantive objection. Which means, Reyes concluded glumly, absolutely no justification for Operation Thunderclap. A moment of collective silence fell over the table. All that preparation, Okafor said quietly, the Fifth Fleet positioning, the drop team rehearsals, the orbital platform deployments, for nothing. The Marines were really looking forward to testing the new exo armor against actual Vrexian heavy infantry, Reyes added. The simulation data only gets you so far. And now we have peace, Blackwood said, raising her glass in a gesture that looked more like surrender than celebration. Wonderful, productive, boring peace. Xrl'tk's recording membranes vibrated with shock, capturing every word for further analysis. The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't been negotiating toward peace. They had been trying to provoke conflict through seemingly reasonable diplomatic offers that concealed poison pills. Yet when their counterparts accepted these offers in good faith, the humans honored their commitments, despite their apparent disappointment. It was a negotiation strategy without precedent in the consensus records. Xrl'tk was so absorbed in processing this revelation that it failed to notice its gravitic field causing a slight disturbance in the ambient lighting. The fluctuation lasted only microseconds, but Colonel Reyes, demonstrating the uncanny situational awareness that Xrl'tk had noted in military humans, glanced upward. We have company, he said quietly, eyes fixed directly on Xrl'tk's position. Ambassador Blackwood didn't look up. Observer Xrl'tk, I presume. Your gravitic suspensors have a distinctive harmonic pattern. Would you care to join us instead of eavesdropping? Court. Xrl'tk had disabled its chameleon skin adaptation and descended to hover at table level. This observer apologizes for the intrusion. Curiosity exceeded protocol parameters. Have a seat, Blackwood said, gesturing to an empty chair. Or hover equivalent. Since you've heard this much, you might as well hear the rest. The Council's High Conclave convened for emergency session 12 standard hours later. Representatives from 47 major species crowded the chamber, an unusual attendance for what had been vaguely described as a procedural clarification regarding human diplomatic practices. Xrl'tk hovered at the central speaking platform, its normally iridescent membrane now a pale blue, the Zkar chromatic indicator for extreme concern. Beside it stood Ambassador Blackwood, looking remarkably composed for someone about to explain her species' diplomatic duplicity to the assembled galactic powers. This emergency session is now in progress, announced First Speaker Tiloran of the Aldebarani meritocracy, their feathered crest rippling with formal patterns. Observer Xrl'tk of the Zkar Consensus has requested audience regarding human negotiation practices. The chamber recognizes Observer Xrl'tk. This observer thanks the Conclave, Xrl'tk began, its translation module set to formal diplomatic register. Recent investigation has revealed concerning information regarding human diplomatic methodology that may impact all species engaged in negotiation with Earth or its colonies. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber, expressed variously as subsonic rumbles, pheromone releases, chromatic flickers, and electromagnetic pulses depending on species. Specifically, Xrl'tk continued, evidence suggests human negotiators deliberately integrate provocative elements into their peace proposals, with contingent military operations prepared should these provocations succeed. The chamber erupted. The silicon-based Drangi delegation crystallized in shock. The methane-breathing Volu released stress bubbles that popped against their atmospheric containment fields. The hive mind representatives of the Naxos collective vibrated in perfect synchrony. First speaker Tiloran raised all four of their limbs for silence. These are serious allegations, Observer. The Conclave would hear the human response before proceeding. Ambassador Blackwood stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. Thank you, First Speaker. The Earth Diplomatic Corps appreciates this opportunity to address what appears to be a significant cultural misunderstanding. She paused, sweeping her gaze across the assembled representatives. Observer Xrl'tk is both right and wrong in their assessment. Clarify, demanded Tiloran. Humans do indeed prepare military contingencies alongside peace negotiations, Blackwood acknowledged. And yes, we often include terms in our proposals that might give counterparties reason to reject peace. However, Observer Xrl'tk has misinterpreted our intent. We do not seek to provoke conflict, rather, we prepare for it while hoping it never materializes. Distinction unclear, rumbled the representative of the silicon-based Dranji lattice. Preparation indicates expectation. For humans, preparation is a constant state, Blackwood explained. It's embedded in our evolutionary psychology. We prepare for outcomes we actively work against. She gestured to the chamber around them. This magnificent conclave chamber has 17 different emergency evacuation systems. The station maintains a defensive fleet. You have security protocols for terrorist attacks, environmental failures, and hostile first contacts. Do you want any of these things to happen? Obviously not, Tiloran replied. Yet you prepare for them, Blackwood said. Humans apply this same principle to diplomacy. We prepare for peace by crafting the best possible agreements. Simultaneously, we prepare for war by positioning assets and developing strategies. Our preference is always peace, but our nature demands readiness for alternatives. The Zorvassian representative, a mass of tentacles arranged in formal negotiation pattern, extended a communication appendage. This explains preparation, not disappointment. Multiple observers have documented human negotiators displaying negative emotional indicators following successful peace accords. Blackwood's diplomatic mask slipped, showing genuine discomfort for the first time. She glanced at Xrl'tk, who pulsed encouragement. That, she said slowly, is more difficult to explain without seeming monstrous. The Conclave would understand, Tiloran encouraged. Blackwood took a deep breath. Humans are complicated. The same human who dedicates their life to healing others might secretly harbor fantasies about performing emergency surgery during a disaster. A builder of bridges might run simulations of how their creation could withstand attacks. Our military personnel train relentlessly for conflicts they hope will never occur. She looked around the chamber, meeting the various sensory organs of the assembled representative. When peace prevails, as we genuinely want it to, there is nevertheless a small part of us that feels untested. The preparations, the contingencies, the readiness we've cultivated, all necessary, all unused, that creates a complex emotional response that might read as disappointment to outside observers. You wish for opportunities to demonstrate prowess, suggested the Kythid representative, their battle claw clicking with understanding. Not consciously, Blackwood corrected, but somewhere in our evolutionary programming. Perhaps. We've spent most of our history in competition, with nature, with each other. Peace is our aspiration, but conflict is our heritage. The chamber fell silent as the representatives processed this information through their various neural systems. Finally, First Speaker Tiloran addressed the conclave. The implications for diplomatic protocols are significant. If humans simultaneously pursue peace while preparing for conflict, traditional negotiation frameworks may require adaptation. If I may offer a suggestion, Blackwood said, human disappointment at peaceful outcomes poses no threat to agreements reached. In fact, we honor our commitments precisely because our word is our bond, a cultural imperative that overrides our evolutionary programming. Evidence supports this claim, Xrl'tk confirmed. Historical analysis shows humans have maintained all peace agreements, despite documented disappointment responses. Then what does the human delegation propose? Tiloran asked. Ambassador Blackwood smiled. A genuine expression this time. War games. 6 standard months later, the Vrexian-human joint military exercise commenced in the previously disputed Tau Ceti system. On the neutral observation platform, Ambassador Blackwood and Vrexian High Commander Xrl'tk watched as human and Vrexian forces engaged in elaborate simulated combat. "Your battlecruiser formation is impressive," Xrl'tk commented, compound eyes tracking the human fleet maneuvers. "Though vulnerable to our scatter-drone swarm tactics." "Just wait," Blackwood replied with a grin. "Battle Group Epsilon has something special prepared for those drones." On cue, the human vessels executed a complex fold-space maneuver, disappearing and reappearing behind the drone swarm, their point defense systems creating a spectacular light show as they neutralized the Vrexian weapons. "Magnificent!" Ezekiel's mandibles clicked with excitement. "We didn't know your fold drives could achieve that vector calculation." "And we didn't know your drones could replicate that quickly," Blackwood admitted, noting how many had survived the human countermeasure. "We'll need to adjust our models." Nearby, Observer Xrl'tk hovered contentedly, recording the proceedings for the Council archives. The new diplomatic protocol, where peace negotiations were followed by joint military exercises rather than actual conflicts, had been implemented, with 7 species thus far, with remarkable success. The humans got to test their preparations and satisfy their evolutionary programming's demand for competition. Their counterparts gained valuable insight into human military capabilities in a controlled setting. Both sides identified strengths and weaknesses that might have been catastrophically discovered in actual combat. Most importantly, the disappointment markers had disappeared from human diplomatic delegations. They now departed peace negotiations with enthusiasm, looking forward to the complex war games that would follow. "I must admit," Xrl'tk commented, "when you first proposed ritualized combat simulations as a diplomatic tool, this observer was skeptical." "It's not so different from what many council species already do," Blackwood replied. "The Kithid have their ritual challenges, the Jorvasians have their dominance displays. We've just formalized it at the interspecies level." "And the Vrexians seem quite enthused," Xrl'tk noted, observing how the normally reserved Vrexian commander was vibrating with excitement as a particularly complex exchange of simulated fire played out. "Turns out we're not the only ones with a taste for controlled conflict," Blackwood said with a smile. "The Vrexians have been breeding for tactical intelligence for millennia. This lets them exercise those abilities without actual bloodshed." Below them, a human special operations team was engaging in close-quarters combat simulation with Vrexian elite guards, their movements a blur of practiced violence rendered harmless by non-lethal technology. "The Council was wise to adopt your suggestion," Xrl'tk acknowledged. 17 potential conflicts have been averted in the past 6 months alone. The statistical projections for reduced casualties are significant. "And just wait until the Galactic Olympics next cycle," Blackwood added. "We've been working with the Cultural Exchange Committee on some new competitive events that should channel these same instincts." As they watched, a human officer and Vrexian commander exchange ceremonial salutes after a particularly well-executed tactical exchange, both displaying the unmistakable biological markers of satisfaction. "Your species remains paradoxical," Xrl'tk observed. "You prepare meticulously for events you hope won't occur. You satisfaction from conflict yet strive for peace. You disappoint easily yet adapt remarkably." "That's humanity for you," Blackwood replied with a shrug. "Walking contradictions with opposable thumbs and nuclear capabilities. We've spent our history figuring out how to live with ourselves. Now we're figuring out how to live with the rest of you." Below them, the war games continued, elaborate, bloodless, and precisely calibrated to fulfill the contradictory needs of species evolving toward peace while carrying the heritage of conflict within them. In the Grand Negotiation Chamber back on Unity Station, a new section had been added to the Diplomatic Protocol's Handbook, Appendix H, Human Negotiation Psychology and Post-Agreement Activity Recommendations. Its opening line, composed by Observer Xrl'tk after careful study, read simply, When negotiating with humans, remember that their disappointment with peace is not a failure of diplomacy, but an opportunity for even deeper cooperation. They come ready for war while hoping for peace. The wise negotiator provides them with both. 5 standard years after the implementation of the Human Diplomatic Addendum, the Galactic Council held its Centennial Evaluation Summit on Unity Station. Representatives from all member species gathered to assess recent diplomatic innovations, with the human-inspired War Games protocol being a central topic of discussion. The Grand Negotiation Chamber had been reconfigured for the occasion, with holographic displays showing statistical analyses of interspecies relations. The central display featured a dramatic downward trend in actual armed conflicts, alongside an equally dramatic upward trend in simulated engagements. Ambassador Blackwood, now promoted to Earth's chief diplomatic liaison, stood before the assembled representatives with Observer Xrl'tk hovering beside her. The ZK-TAN diplomats' membranes had taken on the golden hue of professional satisfaction. The 5-year assessment data exceeds even our most optimistic projections, Blackwood began. Interspecies conflicts have decreased by 73%. Trade agreements have increased by 48%. Cultural exchange program participation has doubled. The first speaker, still Taloran of the Aldebarani, though molting into their elder plumage phase, raised a feathered appendage. The Council acknowledges these positive outcomes. However, concerns have been raised about unintended consequences. Blackwood nodded. You're referring to the competitive escalation phenomenon. Indeed, Taloran confirmed. Several species appear to be investing disproportionate resources into their war games capabilities. The Vrexians have established 17 new tactical development centers. The Cathid have begun selective breeding programs to enhance reflexes specifically for simulation combat. And humans, added the representative from the Zorvassian collective, tentacles rippling with concern, have formed specialized simulation teams that do nothing but prepare for these exercises. Blackwood smiled. These developments were anticipated. In fact, they're features of the system, not bugs. Explain, demanded the silicon-based Drangi representative, crystals vibrating with skepticism. The War Games protocol doesn't just prevent conflict, Blackwood explained. It redirects the same competitive impulses that drive military development. Resources that would have gone into actual weaponry are instead channeled into simulation technology, tactical training, and non-lethal demonstrations of prowess. Xrl'tk's translation module produced the diplomatic equivalent of a throat-clearing sound. Statistical analysis confirms Ambassador Blackwood's assessment. While investment in simulation capabilities has increased, actual weapons development has decreased by 39% across all participating species. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, these simulation technologies have applications beyond military exercises. The Vrexians have adapted their tactical systems for disaster response coordination. The Cathid-enhanced reflexes have improved their medical procedures. Even the Zorvasian tentacle coordination algorithms developed for combat simulations have revolutionized their artistic performances. The chamber buzzed with discussion as representatives consulted their data feeds and conferred with advisors. There is another concern, Taloran said once the chamber quieted. Some council members worry that these elaborate simulations merely postpone inevitable conflicts while allowing all parties to refine their actual combat capabilities. A reasonable concern, Blackwood acknowledged, which is why we're proposing Phase 2 of the protocol. A collective ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. Even Xrl'tk's membranes pulsed with unexpected color shifts. Phase 2? The Zorvassian representative asked, tentacles curling with curiosity. Blackwood nodded to a human aide, who activated a new holographic display showing a massive orbital structure. We call it the Concordia Arena, a neutral facility where interspecies competitions can be observed by the public, broadcast throughout council space, and developed into cultural events rather than merely military exercises. You propose to transform diplomatic safety mechanisms into entertainment? The Drangi representative's crystalline structure vibrated with disbelief. Precisely, Blackwood confirmed. On Earth, we have a long history of redirecting competitive and aggressive impulses into public spectacles. Sports, games, contests of skill, they serve as symbolic conflicts that satisfy our evolutionary programming without actual violence. Images appeared showing human sporting events throughout history: ancient Olympic Games, medieval tournaments, modern athletic competitions, and early space-age zero-gravity contests. By making these simulations public, we add another dimension of sublimation, Blackwood explained. Participants gain prestige through skill rather than destructive capacity. Spectators fulfill their species' need for competition vicariously. The focus shifts from effective killing to impressive performance. And, added Xrl'tk, membranes pulsing with academic excitement, this Observer's research team has identified 17 different council species with evolutionary patterns similar to humans, predators who evolved social constraints on aggression. All 17 show positive neurological responses to competitive spectacle similar to human reactions. The chamber erupted in overlapping discussions as representatives processed the implications. Meanwhile, on a secondary display, footage played of a recent human Vrexian exhibition match that had been broadcast experimentally to several core worlds. The viewing statistics were impressive. Species with no stake in the outcome had watched in numbers exceeding most major diplomatic announcements. There is precedent in council history, Taloran acknowledged once order returned. The Kithid honor contests, the Moshan dominance displays, the Aldebarani flight competitions, but never at an interspecies level, because most species perceived interspecies competition as a precursor to conflict, Blackwood said. The innovation here is recognizing it can be a replacement for conflict instead. From the upper tiers of the chamber, a representative of the hegemony collective, a species known for their isolated, xenophobic stance, activated their rarely used communication channel. The hegemony observes with interest, came their multi-toned voice. We have maintained isolation, partly due to concerns about incompatible conflict resolution methodologies. This approach merits further evaluation. The chamber fell silent. The hegemony had rejected every diplomatic initiative for the past 70 years. Their interest, however tentative, represented a potentially seismic shift in galactic politics. The human diplomatic corps would welcome hegemony observers at the next scheduled exercise, Blackwood offered smoothly, hiding her surprise behind practiced diplomatic poise. As the session continued, discussion turned to implementation details for the Concordia Arena proposal. Engineers debated construction specifications, cultural attachés discussed broadcast rights, military representatives outlined safety protocols. Xrl'tk hovered beside Blackwood at the periphery of these conversations. This observer notes you did not seem surprised by the hegemony's interest, it remarked privately. Blackwood's diplomatic mask slipped, revealing a sly smile. We might have leaked footage of the human Vrexian exercises through unofficial channels known to be monitored by hegemony intelligence. Deliberate provocation through peaceful means. Xrl'tk's membranes rippled with what might have been amusement. Quintessentially human. We're paradoxes wrapped in contradictions, Blackwood agreed, but we're learning to use our quirks constructively. Later, as the formal session concluded, first speaker Taloran approached them in a private antechamber. An observation ambassador, they said, elder plumage ruffling thoughtfully. 5 years ago, humans were seen as dangerous anomalies in the diplomatic community. Today, your species' psychological peculiarities have reshaped council protocols. We prefer to think of it as finding our niche, Blackwood replied. Every species brings something unique to the council. The Drangi bring logical precision. The Zorvazians bring conceptual flexibility. The Aldebarani bring historical perspective. And humans, Taloran prompted. We bring our contradictions, Blackwood said. Our capacity to prepare for the worst while working for the best. Our ability to transform aggression into cooperation through structured competition. And your persistent dissatisfaction, Taloran added, which drives continuous improvement even in times of peace. As they spoke, the chamber's displays showed the proposed Concordia Arena, already being modified based on suggestions from various representatives. What had begun as a simple competition venue was evolving into a complex cultural hub, with diplomatic facilities, scientific laboratories, and public gathering spaces surrounding the central competition grounds. The first event is scheduled for next standard year, Blackwood noted. The engineering teams believe they can have the central arena operational by then, even if the peripheral facilities are still under construction. This speaker anticipates witnessing the inaugural competition, Taloran said formally. We'll save you a good seat, Blackwood promised with a smile. And don't worry, we've designed viewing areas appropriate for all sensory modalities. The Aldebarani section will accommodate full wing extension during moments of excitement. As the diplomatic party dispersed, Xrl'tk made one final entry in the official observation record. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of human diplomatic psychology is not their paradoxical disappointment with peace, but their ingenious transformation of that disappointment into new forms of interspecies connection. They remain evolutionary paradoxes, but now their contradictions serve the Council rather than concerning it. In the station's neutral zone that evening, human and alien representatives mingled freely, discussing not just diplomacy but the upcoming exhibition matches with animated interest. Betting pools had spontaneously formed. Team allegiances were being declared. Merchandise featuring stylized competitor icons had already appeared in station shops. Colonel Reyes, now the human military liaison for the War Games program, raised a glass in toast. To peace through simulated war, humanity's gift to the galaxy. And to the Council, Ambassador Blackwood added, for being open-minded enough to embrace our peculiarities rather than fear them. As glasses, appendages, tentacles, and sensory clusters rose in acknowledgement, Xrl'tk hovered nearby, recording everything. The Observer had studied thousands of diplomatic innovations over its long career, but never one that had transformed a species' evolutionary liability into a galactic asset so effectively. Somewhere in the Xrl'tk historical archives, Xrl'tk knew this would become a case study in diplomatic adaptation. How humanity's disappointment with peace had ultimately created a more stable, interconnected form of peace than the galaxy had ever known before.